What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Quality Talks podcast. This evening, we're going to be talking about something a little different. And as you'll know, we talk a lot about sort of the influencing factors that sort of drive our thinking around quality and sort of how we approach quality. And this evening, we're going to be talking about poo and how poo can really influence our thinking, and probably has done, without us even knowing. And joining me to talk about this very interesting topic of poo is the one and only Chris Pratt. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, Stu.
Could you explain to people now, read your little excerpt and talk to us about why poo is so important?
Well, yeah, so this is a little quote from the Winnie the Pooh books, the first Winnie the Pooh book, actually from 1926. And I think you're going to get the picture up here for folks, but what they'll see is here is Edward Bear coming downstairs now. Bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. As far as he knows, it's the only way of coming downstairs. But sometimes he feels that really there is another way. If only he could stop bumping. And then he feels, well, perhaps there isn't. I love this quote. I love this quote when I first saw this, and I just think it really illustrates a position I think we find ourselves in quite often as quality professionals, where we've just been doing something in a certain way for a long time, and we might be just really busy doing those things, and we just don't have time to stop and think. But occasionally there's just those little glimpses where you think, surely there's another way. But you're too busy, so you just carry on. You just carry on coming down those stairs, bumping your head.
Yeah.
And you think, well, I don't know, maybe there isn't.
Yeah, I love it. And we're going to get into this a little bit more on this evening's episode, everyone. But before we do, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself properly to the audience? Yes. Can I just say that you've got the best voice for a BBC CBeebies bedtime story, so I think we need to sort that out as well. But please do introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Chris Pratt. I've been working in testing for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I came from a much broader engineering background, so I qualified as a chartered engineer. Most of my the early part of my career was focused around design consultancy and IT infrastructure. And yeah, I suppose more like, about 10 years ago, I made that transition from being, interested in the data centers and the networking and all the hardware, to actually being more interested in what the IT actually does. How does it work? Does it work well? Does it serve the purpose that it's supposed to do? So yeah, that's the shift that I made about 10 years ago. And yeah, now I'm just particularly interested in how we can build better software, make better delivery decisions, and how we can reduce risk, without relying too much on that sort of late stage testing and rework cycles.
Yeah, and Chris, we met, was it a couple of years ago now, was it, at one of the Ministry of Testing meetups, or was it?
It was, yes.
It was,
it was one of the MOT London events.
Yeah.
I can't remember quite when it was, early summer probably.
Was it Dunelm, the Dunelm event, where we first actually...
Yeah, because we'd seen each other about, I think. And yes, it was the Dunelm one, which is when I came up to you and sort of said, you don't know me, but hello. Which I tend to do quite a lot at those sorts of places and conferences. So yeah, I tend to go up to you. You don't know me, but
yeah, I've been stalking you for the last.
Yeah. So I just sort of came out and said hi, and I've been listening to podcasts and stuff, and yeah, we just got chatting about some of these challenges, didn't we? That we just face, in the world of testing, in the world of quality, and it sort of went from there, isn't it? We sort of continued to talk since, haven't we? Really.
Yeah, we talk regularly, and also now, obviously, we are organisers, part of the organising team for MOT London as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just want to give you an aim and a massive shout out for your excellent hosting of the recent MOT London event.
Thank
Brilliant.
you. It's very kind of you.
Yeah.
That was my first one. Yeah, me and Eamon were hosting a couple of weeks ago now over at Ramen Space. And so yeah, that was the very first MOT London of the year. UT. Yeah, we got Stu on board. Myself and Eamon were hosting. And yeah, it was good fun. It was really good fun. We had some really good talks, and it was really really great to catch up with a lot of people from the community. So yeah, really good events, and a lot more in the pipeline. So yeah, we're working on the next one, which will be probably April time. We're just trying to sort out venues and things.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, that I think like the talks that were given sort of connect into what we're going to be talking about more on this episode anyway, in terms of the sort of how thinking has changed and that realization of like, maybe there is a better way. Maybe we don't have to do things how we've been doing them for the last 20 years or
That's it, or
however
longer.
long it is. Oh yeah, or longer, right? I think it's that. But I think just coming back to sort of, the quote around sort of having that realization, I mean, I've been there, I know you've been there, and sometimes it's kind of like all of a sudden it will just sort of like, it's almost like a light bulb moment. You're like, why are we doing these things, right? And then other times it can be something that kind of sneaks up on you. And I think sort of, I see this a lot in our industry where you've kind of got the thought leaders that are always pushing the boundaries and are questioning it. Is this really how we should be doing this?
That's it.
And then maybe you've got the people that are maybe either less confident or maybe not in the position where they can influence in the same way, are sort of slowly sort of, coming to that conclusion as well. And I think it's really interesting. I don't know about what you think, Chris.
I think there's a number of elements here, and I think it's a big step in itself to go. I think there's a problem that requires an element of insight in the first place. It's ignorance is bliss. It's easy just to carry on and and sometimes it takes an element of critical thinking to go, is this the right way? And I think the other challenge is if you don't know any different, it's easy to assume that there is no other way, and it almost, it's a difficult position to find yourself in, because you effectively, we start questioning our entire worldview, right? If you're in, imagine you're in that position where you've gone, this doesn't make sense, but I can't point out or put my finger on what we should be doing instead, but I know what I'm doing is wrong. And if that's all you've ever known, it kind of blows your little world up. And I think there's a couple of responses to that, and one is to stick your head back in the stands and keep banging your head as you come down the stairs, or the other is to start looking for the answers. And I can think back to the very first time I felt this was very very early on in my testing career, and yeah, it was like, I'm sure this doesn't make sense. I'm sure there's a better way. And at the time, I just transitioned into testing, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the challenge and the unbounded nature of it. And I was doing a lot of reading, which back then was more focused around the structure of the projects that we were working on in consulting. It was kind of fundamental test process, RTQB stuff. So a lot of the reading that I was doing was kind of in that space. And I kind of found it quite a cathartic process, because, even in that, with that worldview, it was a case of, finding resources and finding books where other people had been in those sorts of situations, actually had set out, this is how to go about it. I've got different views on those ways of going about it now, but at the time it fitted in with the context that we were working in, and it started a habit of kind of reading it and exploring, which I've continued, ever since. So yeah, I think it's a big step. You've got to have that insight, and then you've got to think, maybe, okay, I might not know the answers, but maybe they're out there.
Yeah. And I think something that I've seen, especially over the sort of the time that I've been in sort of more leadership roles, and you have more conversations with people, and you hear well, this is how we've always done it. There's that, but like you say, people don't necessarily know that there is a better way, or they've even thought, and actually maybe they don't even see that there's anything wrong. And when we were talking the other evening, we were talking about that the first step is even being aware.
So spot
right,
on.
and having self-awareness that is what we're doing here the best way, or is there a better way, or is it even adding value in any way, shape, or form? And like, to your point there, if if all of a sudden somebody says, well, there's a better way you could do this, immediately you're like, well, I've been wasting my time all these years.
But then again, you can't go. You can't move overnight, can you? You can't
no,
go
you
from
can't.
doing something in one
No.
way to do something totally different, and then you're in that transition sort of stage, and that's hugely complex as well.
Well, you use the term of the factory school of testing, don't you? When you talk about this, it's kind of like those traditional testing models, and how over time they just become entrenched into what you do, as from a
I mean that's the thing, and I think the factory school as we know it, is all sort of focused around artifacts and test cases. It fitted, years ago. You go back to maybe, I don't know, the 1970s or whatever, 80s, and you had waterfall projects, and everything was sort of done through a design phase, and it kind of fitted in with that. And I mean, interestingly, I think our conversation might go a little bit full circle, actually, because if you start looking at that, it was a sort of a quality inspection model which came from industrial thinking. It came from manufacturing fundamentally. And interestingly, you look at, we were talking about Deming the other day. You look at W. Edwards Deming and a lot of the work that he did. That early testing methodology was focused very much around inspection and verification and compliance, which is all stuff that Deming talked about. But what it missed, right? This is where I think it's a little bit ironic and go full circle. A lot of Deming's thinking was about systems thinking. It was about continuous improvement. It was about process learning, right? So those early days, we kind of picked up on kind of the wrong bits of manufacturing thinking and what Deming was coming to talk about.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, here we are now, in the recent, I don't know, in the last 10 years or so, as we're starting to look more at quality engineering and continuous quality, we've gone back to looking at Deming's ideas from the 1950s, but we're actually looking at the bits of his ideas that we should have picked up.
That's it. Yeah. It's ironic. It is ironic, isn't it? It's kind of
it
like
is totally
the answers were kind of there way back when.
Yeah.
If only we'd have just
We've only looked at the right pages of the book.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've got a bit of a story as well, because I want to tell you a bit about how I first sort of came across this. And this was a consulting project that I was working on. This was a long time ago, and it was an infrastructure replacement project. So we were putting in new servers because the servers were out of date, old versions of OSs and stuff, and we were replacing all the endpoints as well for the same reason. And it was fundamentally, from a test perspective, it was a regression project, right? It was making sure that what it did before, it still does, right? And there was some changes, fairly small feature upgrades went in, but not many. And Anyway, I was asked to put together the testing program, and it was in consulting, so I had to put a budget against it and all the rest of it. And I came up with this sort of 8-week program. I worked out we needed 3 or 4 people. I'd gone back to my test management books and worked out how many tests we thought we could do a day, and we were allowing a certain amount of time for how many defects we thought we might find, and then how much time it might take us to report those defects, and then we needed to allow a certain number of test cycles to allow fixes to be applied and all this sort of stuff. And I remember I came up with this program, and it was £250,000 and 8 weeks of work. And to put that into perspective, the rest of the project was about £400,000, right? So we're just lobbed on £250,000.
Yeah, just like that. Yeah,
and it was challenged. I remember it was quite robustly challenged, by my peers and seniors at the company, and actually also by the client. The client organisation challenged it, quite rightly so. But interestingly, and I sort of give myself credit for this, I think, not that I'm proud of this. Well, I kind of am. I'm proud of it to a certain extent. That actually, they agreed with my reasoning. They agreed with why I'd come up with that and why I thought it was important. And actually, yeah, we proceeded. I was proud of that, but I just wasn't proud of the answer. And I think, what I was fundamentally thinking is, surely there must be a better way. Surely we could do this within, why has it got to take 8 weeks? We must be able to find a way to do this quicker. And absolutely, why the hell is it £250,000? And I think that was my first point of going, yeah, this it's not quite right.
Yeah, I find it is that, like you say, double-edged sword, isn't it? Where you're like, you've done what you needed to do. You managed to convince the people that needed to be convinced because you needed to do that testing.
Correct.
But on the other side of it, it's like, we've just spent another £250,000. It just doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right. No, that's
right.
the thing. And there are a few things, like that. And it just goes back to the old methods. And one of the things I found, and I'd never admit this at the time, but, I would have said as well on those projects we were working on, 80% of the time that I spent as a senior project manager was in meetings. It was talking about testing. It was talking about features. It was writing test scripts. But it wasn't actually doing any testing. So, what we were charging our clients for testing, actually we were only probably 20% of that was actually hands-on.
Yeah.
And that felt wrong as well.
Yeah.
I thought that should just be the other way around,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, you just feel it in your gut, don't you? We were just talking before we came on about you sort of the feeling you get in your gut when just something doesn't feel right, in those situations. And I think for me, in my early career, I was pretty much everything that we did sort of at the first company that I worked at. I was there for about 10 years. Was very much waterfall centric, if you like, but it's a little bit ad hoc as well. It didn't quite follow waterfall. There's a little bits of sort of agile thinking in there occasion. So, but when I left and then I went to EasyJet, and where they were heavily focused on being agile, in my head I thought, oh great, this is going to be completely different, right? So things are going to be slicker. We're going to be focusing on more testing together. No, not at all. All it was 3-week sprints, and all the testing was done at the end. Right? So I remember in my first week, I was in a 2-day planning session, and I'm sitting there thinking, surely this we don't need to be sat in this room for 2 days. We're wasting time, right?
So were you basically doing waterfall but in 3 weeks?
Essentially, yeah, because then we'd have like a 2-week regression window where we'd run 2,500 tests, so that, prioritized and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, regardless of the methodology of how you're or the appearance or the perception of the methodology that you're using, that doesn't necessarily change or improve sort of your approach to quality, right? Because and so over sort of the course of time for me, there's just been all these little things that each time is like, surely there's a better way to do this, surely there's a better way to do that, surely, and then all these bits piece together. And then it started moving away for me from being quality to being from being testing to being quality, and then thinking like more holistically, and then so on. And then you're like, surely there's a better way. So I think like it's one thing to kind of be in that mindset where you're always thinking there must be a better way. It's that continuous learning mindset, I think, right? Is being able to take those ideas and then influence them. And I think that's the real hard part, is actually, because I said earlier about, there's a level of self-awareness you need. So as an individual, you could be in your team and you could be sort of sat there going, surely there's a better way. But even if I know that there's a better way, what can I do? What can I do to influence this?
Yeah.
And that's hard. And I think, we need the sort of the leaders to be thinking more about surely there's a better way in a lot of cases.
I think the trouble is, well, one of the challenges that we face, okay, and as testers, and we've talked about the factory school, and that approach, and what you've got to look at is perception, right? From the outside looking in, okay, for a long time. Testing has looked like somebody sitting at a computer with a big pile of paper, or there might be a test script on the computer, and they're following step-by-step instructions and they're checking boxes, right? And from the outside in, that does not look like skilled work.
So right? True.
I mean, you could argue, right, someone needed to write those test cases. Okay, so maybe that's where the skill is, but I would even argue the toss on that one, because effectively the person writing that test case assumed that before actually touching the product that they knew how the product should behave, how it shouldn't behave, and they're able to encode that in the test cases and produce all of the test cases that they needed in advance to fully test the product, right? Which I think is at the best arrogant, and at the worst bordering on sort of negligent, and that's kind of the best you can get to in that worldview. But the problem is, that's where the industry has come from. We started talking about the 1970s and how it was just focused around inspection, and this is where this factory school of testing came from. And I think the challenge that we face today as quality professionals, and it doesn't matter sort of, where we are or what we're doing, but people outside of the world still see us, as box checkers. It's a big challenge that, we're all doing a lot of work to move the profession on generally. Quality Talks podcast, Ministry of Testing, meetups, conferences, all this sort of stuff. We're very, very good at talking to ourselves internally and sharing ideas and growing. But the trouble is, there's a perception that, hang on, you just check boxes. And that makes those conversations more difficult, when we're trying to talk to others about the benefits of quality and quality engineering. And this could just be within our teams, within, our leadership environments, all sorts. We need to establish that like credibility, that we are, technical, highly technical, critical thinking, thought workers that can provide a lot of value when it comes to our organisations and the products they produce.
Yeah, and that's a battle that we've had for ever since I've been in the industry.
Yeah,
right. There's always been I hate to use the term us and them, but it's like it's always been there, right? But I think it's more about now, where we're trying to focus the conversations more around continuous quality and quality engineering. And you're right. Yeah, I'm going to pick up on what you said there actually before I go on. We're very good at talking amongst ourselves about what we need to do and what we should be doing and how things need to evolve and so on and so on. And we've done that for years, right? We've held ourselves back in the past because testing's our speciality. Nobody can test other than us, right?
Yes.
Now we're saying no, everybody can test.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, hold on a minute. A few years ago, you said nobody could do this because it was too specialist. Now you're saying that everybody can do it or should do it. So we don't help ourselves, right? But I think it's trying to shift that narrative to move away from, the quality professionals in the team being like those gatekeepers, those box tickers, to those validators, whatever you want, whatever terminology we want to use, to being enablers of
right.
quality, right? And I think that's the shift that we need to be focused on. And I'm seeing the sort of like, with some of the conversations I'm having with CTOs and things like that, they are thinking, they are aware that they need people to come in and be those enablers to set themselves up for success and try and move things more to be more of a shared responsibility, a continuous quality mindset, those kind of things. But it's they're sort of like the they're not the norm, right? They're the exception to the rule, and I think that's the thing. And and we're seeing it more and more now when you're seeing so many people getting made redundant. Most of those people that we're seeing getting made redundant are the quality professionals for one reason or another. And we've seen that year on year on year on year on year on year on year. Oh, we'll just outsource it. Oh, we'll get the developers to do it. Or now it's AI. Now, and it's kind of like, so as much as we talk about it and as much as we stand up on stage and have podcasts like this and have the meetups and write blog posts, and I feel like the wrong people are reading them or listening to them or watching them or attending these events, right?
It is the challenge.
So
It's like, how do we get ourselves? There's two challenges here. How do we get ourselves in front of the right people? And also, how do we communicate our message in the right way? So that others can understand it. Those that aren't in the world of testing, or not even be, in software development. The value that we're talking about here when we're talking about quality affects whole businesses. But I want to pick up on one of the things that you said about just that change of role, really, because it's a very, very big change of role, going from that sort of almost siloed worldview that we do the testing in our team, and it's at the end of the process. We're in charge of that, and we do that testing, to being that quality enabler. And it's a big change, not only for individuals, but for organizations as well. So that's, I think, part of the challenge, that it's not just that the individuals, we need to grow and to learn and understand quality and how we can more broadly, influence, product quality. And what we're trying to do ultimately is reduce the defects. We're trying to reduce late stage finding defects late and all of the costs that are associated with that by building quality in at the early stages. But it's a completely different role, and I think one of our challenges is we've got to change in that perspective. But also, what's going on here is an undercurrent of changing technologies. Okay, and you've talked about the cycles that we see with testers being, recruited, made redundant, recruited, made redundant, and this, again, this has been going on for decades as well. You go back to the 1990s, and outsourcing was all the rage, right? And that was kind of where it started. And we talked about the factory school, right? And if you can produce your wonderful set of test cases, and maybe you do that in the UK, You can give those tests to an outsourced supplier that is basically competing on price. You've made the assumption there that anybody can run that test script and get the value from that test script that the person wrote it would get from it, which obviously they're not going to. They don't know why the test says what it says. They don't know why they've been told to put in particular values or do particular steps. They're not looking out for anything other than what that particular test case is written, right? And the clear, does it do this or does it do that, right? Whereas really, if you are going to work with test cases, I prefer to think of them as routes to interesting places in the software. And it's about keeping your eyes peeled about what other things we might see. So, yeah, so the factory school, I suppose, got us to outsourcing. And then, I guess, more in the last 15 years or so, there was the automation trend. And again, the factory school worked well for that because we take a big regression sets and then we just get the computers to do them. So that's even cheaper than outsourcing. And now we're moving into the world of AI and what AI can do for us. And we're also completely rewriting the rule book really on what testing and quality professionals do. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty, not just for us as professionals in the industry, but if we're confused by it and we can't communicate it clearly, then it's more difficult for leaders that have got to make those big decisions around recruitment and reducing costs and all of these things to understand and work out what they should value and what they shouldn't value. So yeah, it's a tricky problem.
It absolutely is. And I think, you're talking there about the pace of change, and, for me, trying to keep up with technological change, especially over the last decade. Things have just raced ahead, right? Massively raced ahead. And probably even more so over the last few years, maybe since COVID, things just seem to have accelerated and accelerated and accelerated. So, it's kind of like trying to change the tires on a car as it's moving, right? It's impossible. You've got to slow the car down at least to help, but you need to stop it. And it's kind of like that sort of thinking,
bump, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. And I think that's the thing. It's kind of like, is it a case? I don't know, we won't know this, but I'm just thinking out loud. Is it a case that businesses are trying to move so quickly, they're not allowing themselves the time, and I'm talking at like the top levels, just to step back and think, is there a better way? Right?
Yeah,
and is there that? Does that play into this as well?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But then isn't that responsibility on us to communicate that? Yes, the leaders need to stop and think, is there a better way? But I think we need to be in a position where we're showing that, demonstrating that, and able to communicate that on their level, and encourage those sorts of discussions, I guess, because perhaps, and this comes back to perception, whereby decisions are being made around testing and quality based on those, what we're talking about is some outdated ideas, and things have moved on a lot. So yeah, it comes back to what we were saying about how do we get in front of the right people, and then even when we are there, how do we say the right things so that our ideas carry favour in those sessions.
Yeah, and when we were catching up before this, we shaped this episode. We were talking. I think you were saying about it's one thing to get a seat at the table. It's another thing to be saying the right things whilst you're sat at that table to actually influence the people that you need to influence. So I think. And also the other thing, and I've been in rooms like this on many occasions, you are the only voice in that room. amongst many other people that you're trying to influence and convince differently.
Yeah, but all the other priorities, right? Don't forget, when you're talking to leaders at that level, they've got a hell of a lot of other things that they're worried about and concerned about.
Absolutely.
So it's just one thing of many, isn't it? That's another thing to consider.
I think though that the coming at it, there's small things that we can do, and I think coming at it like you starting to get people thinking more about the whole system when we talk about quality. I think that's a really, really good first step, right?
It is, definitely. I mean, I really like. So a few episodes ago, you had James Lawther on.
I did, yes. Love that.
Brilliant episode. If everyone hasn't listened to it, go back. It's very
Fish fingers.
Fish finger. That was it. That was what I was going to mention. So this is James's fish finger story because he said, I think one of his summer jobs he worked for a fish finger factory, and I'm just paraphrasing what he said here, but basically he said, his job was to stop the badly shaped fish fingers from going into the box, right? And the better he was at his job, the more fish fingers that he rejected, that meant fewer fish fingers went in the boxes. The cost per fish finger went up, and it's like, and then profit went down. Right? It's great, quality assurance, but actually terrible for the business, right? And he just turned around and said, how do we fix that, right? We didn't improve our inspection. We didn't automate the inspection process. We looked at the process that made these fish fingers, right? So we can actually make more fish fingers that are right in the first place. And I think that's a brilliant example. It's another example from manufacturing, that we can easily apply into software. And I think the other thing as well in the software world is what we actually find ourselves doing is all of those misshapen fish fingers that end up in the bin. We're actually having to put our hand in the bin, get them out, and then reshape them. This is the defect. The ones in the bin are like the bugs, the defects. Someone's got to then take that rather dodgy thing out of the bin and actually make this back into a proper fish finger in the first place, and then it goes through the inspection process again. And then hopefully it doesn't end up in the bin, but it might do. And I just love that because it's a really good example. It's a really good analogy that shows the difference between inspection at the end and then thinking about the system as a whole. The system that creates that software. And I guess that is the shift that we're making. And interestingly, a lot of those ideas, as we were sort of starting to talk about earlier, they've become kind of trendy in the last 10 years, really, I would say, with the terms like quality engineering and continuous quality. But they're not really new ideas. I mentioned Deming at the beginning, and he rose to fame in the 1950s. You don't know about Edward Deming. He rose to fame really because of the Toyota manufacturing process. So he was an American, actually, as it happened, and in the 1950s, post-war, Japan obviously had to rebuild its industrial base, interestingly enough, the Americans weren't particularly interested in his ideas, and he ended up out in Japan. And he was doing just that, really. He was starting to focus on the systemic way that vehicles are manufactured, right? And I think that's kind of where it sort of came from, really. So we've gone basically all the way back to there, which is what we're starting to sort of build upon, really. But his themes were really to start to say, he would sort of argue that quality is management's responsibility. And I think we've got to be a little bit careful here. What he would say is that 85 to 90% of problems actually come from the system. Okay. And the system, and I think this is particularly relevant in manufacturing, maybe less so in software, but the system is designed by management, right? So blaming the workers for defects, which is, I think, what was actually going on, right? Isn't the way to do it. We need to look at the system. He would then argue that quality should be built into the process. So instead of inspecting defects at the end, we want to design the process so defects do not occur. And then he's got a big focus around continuous improvement. So you might have heard of Deming cycles, plan, do, study, act, or whatever. Ideas around Kaizen, lean development, all of this stuff. And focusing on kind of long-term thinking, really. So, it was, try and avoid that short-term like profit focus, targets and internal competition, and actually start thinking about system operation, optimization, thinking about cooperation, and thinking about how we learn as organizations. So all of that stuff, right, that I've just mentioned came about in the 1950s. But it all sounds very familiar, doesn't it?
It does a little bit, doesn't it? Yeah.
And it's an interesting irony, because we started off talking about the factory school, and actually if you read Deming's work in one particular way, you end up with the factory school of inspection at the end, and it's just a misinterpretation of his ideas. And effectively what we're now doing is we're going back and looking at what was actually applied, in the manufacturing space. And we're starting to look at how that can, apply to us in the software world.
Well, yeah, and obviously, those that have listened to some of our earlier episodes will know that Chris worked in the car manufacturing industry before moving into tech, and a lot of his learnings he brought across. But when you think about things like what we've got our pipelines now, that's almost like your the industrial line of cars, isn't it? And like all these different things that happen, all these different checks that are happening, and just things like when you almost like relate them back, it's kind of like, it's actually what why is it taking us so long to loop back round to these things? But to your point, a lot of it is misinterpretation, right? So they've taken the things that they thought, oh, that sounds right, that sounds logical, but there's all the systems thinking piece. And I'm thinking more like in terms of as we've sort of opened that conversation up more, we're trying to, let's say, open that conversation up more. Reflecting back on sort of those comments and those ideas almost gives you kind of like hope. It's like, oh, actually, this isn't something, because the reason I say that is because when something's like brand new, like nothing is ever brand new. An idea comes from another idea, right? So there's always an idea of something that was built on, but it can feel like, oh, how this is such a new thing we're trying. How can we even talk about it? How can we even convince people this is... Well, actually, look, this isn't a new thing, guys. Look, 1950s.
1950s. Yeah, but it's about translation as well, isn't it?
Precisely.
And I think, this is the other thing. It's an abstraction, isn't it? We're talking. What Deming was talking about, what Deming was looking at was very much about manufacturing, and there are a number of somewhat uncanny similarities between manufacturing and software. Right. There's also a number of differences, but it takes a level of abstraction to look at what was done and what worked in a factory, and then apply that to software. Because I'm pretty sure there'd be a lot of people listening to this that might go, "Hang on a minute, what the hell is manufacturing and car factories got to do with software?" It's very difficult to see the difference. And I think we do look at software as a very intellectual activity. And I think we could sometimes consider manufacturing and what goes on in factories to be that less skilled work. It's like that factory school of testing again. We're back in the same place, right? But I think sometimes there could perhaps be an element of snobbery around what we do in software. Because it is complicated, right? It is intellectual. It is critical thinking. It is very, very difficult work. And then to want to try and draw parallels to manufacturing is quite an abstraction that we need to make there. So I think there is a challenge there, but fortunately, here we are in 2026. A lot of that, that the building of that bridge has largely been done for us, so we don't need to necessarily go back to Deming's ideas in the 1950s and start there, because there's a huge amount that has been done, since. And I think, you're right, you're picking up on systems thinking, and I think, there's Donella Meadows' book that you read recently, which has sort of changed the way you've been thinking
blew my
around it.
mind.
Absolutely, this is it. And then there's things like Goldratt as well, which Goldratt wrote The Goal, which you may have heard of. And again, this is The Goal is a manufacturing based. It's a storybook actually, but it talks about flow basically, and it's theory of constraints and lean and all this sort of stuff. But that was based around a manufacturing plant. But what's more relevant to us, for example, is the Phoenix Project. And if you haven't, any of our listeners haven't read the Phoenix Project by Gene Kim, I think, and amongst others, that's very well worth picking up. It was one of the first books that I read when I moved into software, 8-10 years ago. And it's brilliant. It is really, really brilliant, because it draws those parallels for you, because it talks about a company called Parts Unlimited. They're a car parts company. They've got a factory, but they're also responsible for, they have a number of stores, they have an online website, and the Phoenix Project is basically their way of trying to bring everything together onto one kind of software platform. And as you can imagine, the start of the story is everything, the world is blowing up and no one can actually focus on what they're supposed to be doing because there's all this firefighting going on. The main character in the book kind of meets a guide, who takes him over to the factories and shows him what goes on in the factory, and then draws those parallels between what happens in the factory and IT work. And I think one of the fundamental differences for us in IT is that a lot of what we do is invisible. If you have a factory and stuff's going wrong in a factory, you have a lot of inventory piling up. You have bottlenecks where a particular plant item is required and it can't keep up with all the other manufacturing stations that are in there. But in the world of software, it's more difficult to see. And I think one of the first things that they started to do, in the Phoenix Project, is to make things visible, right? Make the invisible visible. And Goldratt, I suppose, in many ways, he's got some different ideas to Deming. He was more focused around flow. That was kind of where he was. It kind of explains, why systems produce poor flow, whereas Deming's more about why systems produce poor quality, and we need both. When we're working with software, we need to be continually building new features, but we need to do them in a way which are representing where we build quality in, rather than inspect it for the end. So I think that I was going to say, that's well worth having a look at. It's an interesting book for drawing those parallels.
Yeah, it is. I read that a number of years ago, and I think there's a follow-up called the Unicorn Project. I think I'm not sure. I've not read the one, but
the Unicorn Project is the follow-up.
We all love a good unicorn, don't we? Especially in our industry. I think so. I just want to touch on what you were saying there about sort of the invisible work, because I think that's really important, making things visible, and I think that's something that we, as quality professionals, a lot of what we do is invisible.
I think it's a big problem. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it also drives a lot of the decisions that we make, right? Because if you think about software development, you might have a software developer and they're building things, right? They've got something to show for what they're doing, right? But for us as testers, we provide information, right? And it's somewhat more sort of nebulous. And, and that I think has driven some approaches which aren't necessarily helpful, because it's driven us down a route of producing artifacts which aren't necessarily particularly helpful. It's driven us down a route of counting things. It's driven us down a route of having pass-fail ratios, and having red, green, and amber, and actually, when you come to think about it, it's all a load of nonsense. What we should be talking about is in terms of risk. We should be. You like telling stories. I like telling stories. It becomes much more about storytelling, because we should be talking about what have we done. Tell the story of the testing that we've done. What have we covered? What have we not covered? What were the risks when we started testing? What are the risks that we feel that we've mitigated? What have we found? But again, it's translating this information into the right sort of language so that it makes sense to the people that we're talking to. And this is something I think you mentioned when we were chatting the other day, is how important it is for us to adjust our messaging, adjust what we're saying, so that it fits, the person that we're talking to.
Yeah, it is really, really, that's really important. And it links into what we were saying about, if you can get, the first part is getting a seat at the table. The second part is speaking their language and talking about, business value in a way that people understand. And I think that's, for me, that's a skill that I think shouldn't be underestimated. You can have all the technical skills under the sun. You could be the best tester in the world. You could find the most bugs ever because of just how you think and how you apply, the different techniques to your testing and all this other stuff, right? But if you can't communicate it in a language that people understand, it's hidden, it's wasted. And I think that for me is where people need to learn and develop those skills more and more and more and more.
Yeah, definitely.
And be able to, I mean, I've had I'm sure you've faced into this as well, Chris, over the years, when you'll just be out in a pub, right?
Yeah.
And somebody will say to you, Chris, it's good to see you, man. What are you up to? What are you doing work-wise now? And you're like, how do I explain what I do? Hold on. How do I explain it in a way that this person who's just about to buy me a beer is gonna care? Right?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I've got a good retort. If you ever go to a comedy gig and someone picks on you, and then they say, "Oh, what's your name?" Tell them your name, whatever. They go, "Oh, what do you do?" And then you go, "I work in IT," right? And they're not going to leave it at that. So they go, "Oh yeah, IT, right?" So everyone works in IT these days. What do you actually do? And you go, "Okay, well, what I do is I point out when it's broken. That's what I do. I point out when the IT is broken." And then the comedian comes back and says, "Okay, and then what do you do? Do you fix it?" I go, "Oh no. I give it to somebody else to fix it."
Yeah.
It's a good, it's quite not a bad model for for what we do in testing. It doesn't quite fit so well with with the quality model, but I always find that's quite an amusing way of communicating what testing is about. But again, it doesn't necessarily reflect intellectual, thought-provoking, critical thinking, thought work type stuff.
And I think, sorry, just to didn't mean to cut you off there, Chris, but just to pick up on that, I think that's the thing, isn't it? That's the hidden work. It's the how we're doing it. And for me, that's the hidden bit that we don't talk enough about. And that's where you start talking and about the value add. And then being okay, so this is what I've done, but this is how I've done it. I'm sharing my thinking around how I've done it and why I've done it like that. And the reason I've done it like that is because of this impact and this risk. And then, oh, guess what? I found this. And then actually, this is what that means to the customer. and piecing those things together rather than going, yeah, I run this test, it's broken, I've raised a defect. Okay, great, thank you very
this
much.
is the thing, and it's kind of the harm, I guess, that sort of factory style has caused. And you know what? I suppose I want to sort of say at this point as well, is I'm not sort of bashing factory style completely. I know a lot of
No, not at all.
it's a bit trendy these days to people sort of pick on RSTQB and stuff, and actually I want to defend it a little bit because it's where I started and it has a place, it has a purpose, and I've used it and it has been useful. But I think as mature quality professionals, my issue with it is when it's seen as the entire worldview.
Yes,
and my
exactly.
issue is when a tester or someone new to the industry studies ISTQB, they look at the factory school and that's how they're taught how to do it. And then they stop learning because they think that's it, I know testing now.
Yes.
And the point is, and this is the whole point around bump, right? Is actually, no, that's just the start. And there's loads and loads of different ways to test. And then, when we start talking about quality, that expands that view, even more. So I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. And I think we need to make this point as well. This is actually quite important for this discussion. In certain contexts, it's the right thing to do. In certain contexts, it's the only thing we can do, right? If we're working in a regulatory environment, these artifacts that we produce become more like legal, legal documents, but they need to exist to prove that we've done what we've said we've done. So, but it's not just that. You work in consulting. I used to work in consulting. Sometimes customers have a particular expectation, and they might be signed up to a particular model. They might have, in my example, I had a client that owned the test strategy. Right, they had ownership of that test strategy. So we we didn't really have any choice around, the particular method that we used, other than to try and influence the strategy. So there are certain circumstances, as well as we've got to just consider here for a moment other sort of structural or systemic or political reasons that there might be, in our organisations, in our projects, or whatever, that are constraints as well, because we don't always have carte blanche, right? We might have all the best ideas, but we can't always, go and do what we think is the latest thing. In some cases, we've been doing things a certain way, and it might be considered, well, those ways kind of work, and actually to change anything introduces a whole load of risk, and absolutely it does. So, and I think this is where we need to be careful as quality professionals. It's not light and dark. It's not black and white. We can't, go into work one day and go, right, I'm going to completely change the way that I operate and do things completely differently, because we don't operate like that. We all have our context and our organisations. We're all within a system of some sort. So yeah, we can't just do those things. So yeah, it has its place, and in some reason, sometimes there is a very good reason that we have to follow those methods. But I think there's an interesting parallel to bring in here, because you talked about, how we communicate what we've done, trying to evolve from going into a meeting and saying, well, I've run 5 tests and 4 passed out of 5 or whatever, to actually telling a story about what we've learned and what we've discovered. And I think we can just make parallels with other professions that do similar sorts of things, right? So if you were to talk about, the police or a detective in the police, and their job is to go and do an investigation and find out the truth about something, okay? Now, do they write policing cases, right? And they have certain steps, and then they go through, and they're meeting with their chief inspector or whatever. They say, "Well, I've done case 1 and 6 and 4, and they failed, but I did." They don't do it, do they? They go and do some investigation, they find out some information, and then they come back and they report and say, "This is how far through I am. This is what I've looked into. This is what I found. This is the risks. This is my what I'm uncertain about." And it's it's the same for so many professions, isn't it? You think about healthcare or law or whatever. We're the only profession that seems to sort of squeeze these things into test cases. I'm sounding rather a lot like James Back here, I have to say. So I ought to give him credit for some of this stuff as well. So, yeah, a lot of my ideas around testing specifically are influenced by RST, rapid software testing. Which James Back and Michael Bolton have put together. And they've recently brought out a brilliant book, which is very well worth picking up. But yeah, I did the RST course a few years ago, and it's one of those things, when we're coming back to bump, where it just blows your mind, really, because if you're so used to thinking about testing in a certain way, spend any time with James or Michael, and you'll suddenly realise that actually it's not that there's necessarily right or wrong ways of doing things, right? But there's lots of different ways of doing things, and the better way, we don't talk about best practices. We talk about what's good practices. It's about identifying what's right given the context that we're in. And I think that's kind of the point that I was trying to make. It's not that factory school and ISTQB is necessarily wrong, but it's just not the only way. And what's actually important for what we do is we need to consider context and where we are, and we also need to consider our communication and how we report on what we've done.
Yeah, and I think that that just leads us all the way back round to the whole systems thinking. Like you mentioned it, Ray, right? You can understand you're part of that system. You're within that part of your system, and you understand it, and you can see the things that are wrong, right? You can see the things that maybe don't feel great or cause you problems. But unless you have that view, or somebody has that view of the entire system, then fixing it here might not be the place to fix it.
No, that's
right.
it.
And this is the piece that I've just released. I'm trying to get better with my writing, this, and I've just released an article today. So today is Sunday. I'm releasing my articles on a Sunday around what the first 90 days in a head of quality role, could look like or should look like. From my own personal experience, this is kind of how I approach it. And a big part of that is going in and starting to understand the entire system, right? Getting human connection, but historical connection as well, right? Understanding the system you're working within. So you get the context of how things are and how they've come to be, and then understanding what those actual things are and how everything sort of connects together.
Yeah.
And I think, unless you do that, you can't go into any organization and try and magically wave a wand and go, now we're going to do like continuous quality, everyone, or quality engineering. No, it just doesn't happen. So I think that's the thing. And I, for me, that's where more and more and more people are going to need to be focusing in on looking at the entire system. And it's just, don't get me wrong, it's not like it's an easy thing to do. Right, it's not, and it's time. It takes time, and there's ways you can do it. And in my my blog post, I started shaping what the first 30 days look like. The other days will come later. Right, I'm not giving it all to you in one hit, everyone. But there's a lot there, and this is just kind of how I approach it. It's a framework, and again, right, continuous quality. It's a framework. It's conceptual. It's like to your point, is like there's different ways you can approach this.
That's right.
Right. So yeah, we want to build quality in throughout, there's many different ways you can do it. People will talk about different ways. It's like there isn't a cookie cutter approach to doing any of this, right? You can take a little bit of what we talk about on this podcast, take a little bit about what Richard and Vern talk about, a little bit about Lisa Crispin, and whatever that looks like, Nicholas Sedgwick, or whoever,
Absolutely.
and then just kind of use that and mold it to what works for you. And it's exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, and I think
Context.
it is a big part of the challenge, and I think, sometimes there's an inclination to, if something works well on one project or for one customer, or in one company, to then want to go and apply, that completely to somewhere else, and it doesn't really work like that, does it? This is the thing, and I think, one of the analogies that I use actually in my first blog post, that I've actually quoted the Winnie the Pooh story, is it's a bit like we're going into the 100-acre wood, and in the 100-acre wood it is scattered loads and loads and loads of jigsaw puzzles, right? And each jigsaw puzzle might be a particular sort of view of what good testing or good quality looks like, right? It could be the Lisa Crispin, or the James Back ideas, or whatever. It could be based very much around Agile, or Spotify. All of these pictures are out there. All this knowledge and experience is out there. But what we've actually got to do as professionals is to explore and understand and build up our own pictures and our own understanding of what we think good testing and good quality looks like. And my finished jigsaw, well, it probably never will be finished, right? But the picture that I'm creating may well be different to the picture that you would create. Okay, they might have similarities and they might have differences, and that's fine, And I just think everyone should be just trying to sort of build that understanding of what this should look like. And a lot of the ideas as well, are polarizing. We talk like quality professionals and testing professionals agree on stuff, right? And it's not the case. There is different people with different views who have very, very healthy, strong views about what's right and what's wrong. And the point is actually, an idea can be right and wrong at the same time,
Yeah,
and there's nothing
absolutely.
wrong with that. It all just comes down to shades of grey, doesn't it? And it ultimately it depends on where we are, our context, what we're trying to achieve, what are our outcomes that we're aiming for here, over and above just trying to apply some process for the sake of process.
Yeah, and my brain has just sort of switched to a slightly different angle on something, that thinking about the need to sort of start changing our thinking towards being systems thinking, and understanding context, and all these different potential ways that we could improve given said situation, right? And I keep going back to, in my own mind, about educational systems, right? And people that are coming through, those students that are coming through the educational systems and doing their STEM degrees, and and computer science degrees, and then are they being taught this stuff, right? Because if they're not being taught this stuff, we're going to be on this constant
trying
to swim up a waterfall, aren't we? Because the people that are coming through won't be coming into organizations with this thinking now. So we're trying to change it from within, but we need to also change it from the people coming through.
No, I think it's very true, and it's like it's very rare that very few people seem to start out in their career wanting to be testers, right? It's the number of people that have kind of fallen into it in one way or another, right?
Yeah.
It seems to be the majority. Most people start out doing something else, and then they discover testing and go, oh, this is interesting. But it's also an interesting point about universities, and obviously I did my degree 20 odd years ago now, but it's difficult to comment on what might be on syllabuses now for computer science courses or whatever. But I kind of suspect that even if they do cover testing, they're probably looking at it in a particular, potentially in a fairly rudimentary way, or in a way which is kind of says that this is what it is and that's it type thing, rather than what we've been talking about into this session, which is to say, well, testing could be many things and quality could be even more things, right? Instead of introducing it in a way as this is actually a large, complicated or complex and nuanced field, it's probably taught in a fairly
binary way,
determined sort of way, that this is it, and then that's all you need to know about testing. Is what I would imagine. We need someone to come on who's done computer science recently to disagree with us.
That's something I want to try and do, actually, to because I'm really keen on seeing how we can sort of connect more with the educational system, right? Because if we want to talk about systems, like the educational system connects to the employment system, which connects to it's all a system, right? So how and kind of if we truly want to change the shape of what we do and how we talk and the skill and the people coming through, where do we do it? We need to do it at source.
That's right.
Right, we need more thought leaders coming through with that type of mindset.
This is
so I'm very keen. So if sorry, Chris, I'm just going to put this out there right now.
Yeah, go for it. I forget we're on a podcast here.
We're on a podcast, Chris. We could talk to the audience. Just sort of me. We chat all the time. We chat like this for hours. But if there's anybody out there that is in the educational system, a lecturer, a teacher, computer science, that would like to come on and talk about this, or connect with us just to sort of understand a bit more from what we're talking about, love to get people on, love to talk more about it, because the more we can influence that side of things, for me, the better. You're going to roots, you're going to the source, right?
Yeah, and it does come back to what we were saying about getting, talking to the right people again, doesn't it? It's how do we get our message out there to the people that need to hear it?
And it's not just within the organisations that we work with, and that's the thing. Like when I was reading the book around systems thinking, I've got a number of others that I've got lined up now, because I'm just like, I'm obsessed. Like it just blew my mind. It's like, hold on, so that connects to that, and then that becomes that, and that has an influence on that, and then I can't not look at the world now without thinking of systems. I think I've been cursed.
This is the thing. When you start studying this sort of stuff as well, you'll read one book and then it references others, or you'll find out about others. And
precisely,
this is sort of the sort of the rabbit holes that I've been down. Really, but fundamentally, it's quite nice to do that bit of anthropology, really, when you can actually trace things back to the beginning. Which is kind of what we've been doing a little bit on this podcast, to see where those ideas and values actually came from.
Exactly.
Because we can talk about what's current and what's going on right now, but actually it adds quite a lot of weight to it to see where these things have come from.
It's all context, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing, and kind of like you opened up with we were talking earlier about, these aren't new ideas. It's just how we're now shaping them and talking about them and using them. And if you think about how we've gone from, over the last few years, in the terminology that we've been using, we've gone from testing to quality assurance to quality engineering to continuous quality. But actually, systems thinking is the piece that actually underpins it all.
Absolutely.
And that's what's been missing. It's crazy when we think about it. Absolutely. We've been talking for a while, Chris.
We have, indeed.
We've been talking for a while, my friend. This is what we do. We chat and chat and chat, and then we realise that it's dark, everybody's gone to bed, and, we're still chatting, and it's fine, because that's what we're here to do. I think we should probably wrap this up. I think we're in a good place to wrap it up. I always, as you know, you're a regular listener. I always give the floor to our guests to kind of a final thought, final comment, anything you want to leave the listeners with, following on from this conversation, which has been brilliant, by the way. Thank you so much. I love chatting to you, man. It's yeah, we have some really good insights and sort of ideas that bounce around. And it all started with poo tonight, talking about poo. So see, you could talk whatever you like, even poo, and you get some really insightful discussions. But yeah, so Chris, anything you want to leave the audience with?
I think really it's just for us as individuals to challenge ourselves, and the point that we've been making today is about questioning, the way we have been doing things, to go, even if we don't know what the right way is to trust ourselves. If we're looking at something and we feel that perhaps it's not necessarily, the right way, maybe there's a better way, and to go out there and look for the answers. And in many cases I'm pretty convinced, in most cases the answers are out there. We've just got to find them. We're going into the 100-acre wood and we've got to see the wood from the trees, as they say. So there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a huge number of books, and when we're starting to look at things like quality, we can go back a very, very long way. And sometimes as well, I've found it's quite easy to get distracted into lots of various different sort of rabbit holes of knowledge. So the challenge sometimes is to remain focused on the challenge that we're actually facing. But those challenges evolve, and I think we need to also consider that it's not just a technical challenge. It's not just a change of mindset or technical skill to move from being, a test engineer to a quality professional. Yes, we need to learn a lot about continuous quality and quality engineering. But what we've also spoken about here is so many other skills that are important, like communication and leadership, and learning and feedback. There's so many other areas. Marketing, I think, is a big part of it. Sales. And the way that we present ourselves as professionals, I think, is so important. So I think, we are going through a big change at the moment. The industry is changing. But I think that's nothing new for us as quality professionals. I've been sort of looking back all the way through. We talked all the way back from the 1950s here. The profession and things have just continually changed. And I think what's going on at the moment around, quality engineering, continuous quality, and also how AI is starting to change things is just the current version of that. Challenge is just to continue learning and to try and keep a pace with what's going on. And of course, the best way really to do these things is what everyone's doing today. Really, it's engaging with podcasts and blogs, going to meetups, going to conferences. This sort of thing is how we get those opportunities to share those ideas of exactly what's going on in the industry right now, and how to prepare ourselves best for the future.
Nice. And Chris, by the way, you've got a new blog that's coming out very soon. Have you not? Do you want to talk to people a little bit about that?
Yes, I have. It's been in the works for some time. I wanted to put it out there about 6 months ago and procrastinated over it. But yeah, it's taken a good 4 months of getting over the fear of putting it out there, and a couple of months to actually get on with actually building it and putting it together. But yeah, I've recently put together a little bit of a blog, chrispratt.uk, and really it starts off with the bump story. We talked about Winnie the Pooh, and the reason I'm sort of starting that blog is to reflect on what I've learned in my career over the last sort of 10 years, but also using it as a bit of a platform for fresh thinking and new ideas, to put stuff out in the world, get feedback from others, and see where it goes. So yeah, it's really that space to pause and stop and think, and look at where things are going.
Yeah, nice. And I've read some of those articles, and your style of writing, I really love it. So, people, you're in for a real treat. So yeah, and the blog is linked in the show notes. So go and check it out.
Thank you. chrispratt.uk.
And that's a great way to wrap it up. And I'll just add a little bit just on top of that in terms of if you are listening to this podcast, if you are a regular listener, share it with those people that are within your organization, right? It's again, we're trying to get to in front of people that can make decisions, that that other people that we can influence, right? So we, often we'll be talking to the people that already know this stuff, already, So how do we get in front of those other people? Well, one way is to share, right? If you're going to a meetup, invite somebody else from your team to the meetup. We do the London meetups, as we said before. Invite your developers, invite your engineering manager, invite your CTO, bring them along. It'd be great to have people come along. But Chris, this has been great, my friend. Loved having you on this evening. Absolutely loved it.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has, and I think I'm going to have to let you get back and sort of finish building your Iron Man that's in the background.
This is it. I'm getting there slowly, but
yeah.
Time.
Hopefully, by the next time we have you on, he'll be finished, and we'll have you in the suit. But that's it, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hopefully, you're taking some learnings away from the discussion that me and Chris have had this evening on this episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, tell your colleagues, tell your friends, tell the strangers in the street, and join us next time on another episode of the Quality Talks podcast. Take care for now.